This is the I Still Believe in Cleveland podcast. I am Ryan Sponsoler.
Snap is back, ball down, the kick on the way, line drive, the kick is good! With 2 seconds left in overtime, the Browns have won it!
Jim Donovan and Doug Deacon were left with cracking voices and ear-to-ear smiles following last Sunday's 12-9 win over the Ravens. Baker Mayfield, Duke Johnson, and rookie wide receiver Derek Willis, who was the next man up with Rashard Higgins' injury, led the Browns down the field with big plays, giving Greg Joseph the opportunity to make another awkward-looking field goal. Coach Hugh Jackson went on to give the game ball to Joseph for his mental resilience and getting the end result needed while addressing the team after the game.
Listen to me, man. You are becoming something special, I'm telling you. If you guys will keep working and do what we're asking you to do, great things are going to happen. You guys broke another streak today. We got to win in the division!
The Browns have another opportunity to do something special this Sunday against the Los Angeles Chargers. If you missed last year's December 3rd, 19-10 loss to the Chargers, LA is coached by Anthony Lynn. Lynn is a former running back who took part in the Broncos' back-to-back Super Bowls in 97 and 98. He switched over to coaching in the year 2000, where he most recently spent 8 seasons coaching under Rex Ryan with the Jets and the Bills. Sandwiched in between that, Lynn coached the Browns running backs under Romeo Crennel in 07 and 08. Those seasons saw Jamal Lewis run for 1,300 and 1,000 yards. Lynn is continuing to get the most out of his running backs in Los Angeles, with former Wisconsin standout Melvin Gordon and a speedy undrafted second-year back in Austin Eckler. Here's Lynn talking about their balanced running back attack.
You know, I feel comfortable with those guys because Austin can run between the tackles. He's a strong young man, and Austin, he was in a situation like that last year, and he fumbled. And so I always want to put guys back in that situation. I think it's important to have a guy like that, and I think we have one of the best guys in the league in Melvin. You know, but we was giving him a blow yesterday. He had taken a lot. He had a lot of touches. Austin at that time did not have a lot of touches, so we thought we'd put it on Austin's shoulders.
Eckler is the big surprise here and will be a key aspect to the Browns' defensive strategy against the Chargers, as discussed by Lynn.
His versatility, it shows up in games, and opponents have to defend that, you know, with linebackers, safeties. So those are advantageous matchups for us.
Austin Gale of Pro Football Focus recently ranked Eckler and Gordon as the best backfield duo in the NFL through Week 5. Gordon does receive 68.7% of the running attempts and running back targets, but Eckler's ability to turn nothing into something has been outstanding. That ability was on display in this play near the end of the second half for the Chargers' 26-10 win over the Raiders.
Fumbles the snap, gets it out quick to Eckler. He's at the 45, cuts inside 40, 35, 30. Eckler working the left sideline to the end zone, touchdown!
Phillip Rivers spoke to the media following their win, describing Austin's breakaway speed.
And then he's got some juice now. I mean, he can really run. You know, I think he's one of those, you don't realize how fast he's running until you got to chase him, which I never have, but I've seen a lot of guys do it. So
Eckler previously broke a 22-yard touchdown pass the week before in a win against the Niners, and in the Chargers' other winning formula, Melvin Gordon scored 3 touchdowns in a Week 2 31-20 win over the Bills. Both Gordon and Eckler rank highly for yards after initial contact and yards per route run, with Eckler actually outranking Gordon and the rest of the NFL for both statistics. Of course, it won't just be the Chargers' running game that will challenge the Browns, as Phillip Rivers is as good as ever with a bevy of receivers they can quickly find downfield, as he discussed after the Raiders game.
You know, today, how many guys touched the ball, and did anybody have, you know, Tyrell had the long one, but we didn't have any, it wasn't a 8-catch, 150-yard day for anybody. But you look up and there's 330 yards passing, and a lot of guys touched it, and it was efficient.
Rivers still has a favorite target, though, and that is Keenan Allen, who hovers around double-digit targets for each game this season. Antonio Gates is still out there catching balls and getting first downs. 6'4", second-year receiver out of Clemson, Mike Williams, is a consistent downfield threat along with Tyrell Williams, who caught a deep 48-yard pass against the Raiders. The Chargers provide a tall challenge at the skill positions, but they do have some instability on their offensive line. Starting left tackle Russell Okung and starting right tackle Joe Barksdale both missed the game against the Raiders, and their return is in question against the Browns. Former Browns receiver Travis Benjamin has also been hurt, but the more impactful injury to the Chargers' fortunes is to former Buckeye defensive end Joey Bosa. Bosa and his brother, current Buckeye Nick Bosa, are both rehabbing injuries, with Joey's return date most likely set after the Chargers' Week 8 bye. Bosa recorded 7 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble against the Browns last year. The Chargers' defense and special teams have forced some key turnovers in their wins, and they rank 6th in the NFL for giveaway takeaway ratio. But you know what team ranks first? That's the Cleveland Browns. The other similarity that these two teams hold is their often rocky relationship with their kicker. The Chargers appear to surpass the Browns in instability on this one, with 5 different kickers in 2017 and a brand new one in Caleb Sturgis for 2018. Sturgis has been perfect from within 40 this year, but is 50-50 from beyond and has only made 4 out of his last 8 extra points in the last 3 games. It's pretty much a pick-em between these two teams as they face off in First Energy Stadium, but you know who we pick, and that's the Cleveland Browns. Drew Swallen is back to look at the Browns' offense with a focus on fantasy prospects.
We're going to spend a little more time talking about what we can expect from some of our Browns skill players and taking a bit of a deeper dive into the Browns offense here. Let's jump into what we can expect this week out of our Cleveland Browns. They get the Chargers, and this is a defense that is not necessarily all that great, specifically with defending the pass. So I think Baker is a decent start here. I think there are probably some better options out there, but if you're streaming the quarterback position, I think he is a decent play here. After 5 weeks, the Chargers have given up the 9th most points to quarterbacks this year. So they have some issue, and they specifically have an issue with covering the wide receiver position. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but just a little bit about Baker Mayfield. Pro Football Focus, they have him rated at an 89.9, which is without question the highest rating in the rookie class, and it's not all that close. Saquon Barkley checks in with a 75.9 rating, and Denzel Ward has a 78.9, so pretty big drop off from Baker Mayfield to the next best rookies on that list. The top of the draft seems to be producing pretty well with those 3. Sam Darnold isn't quite as high. He checks in with a 52.7, and he's been pretty good, which just goes to show you how good of a rookie campaign Baker Mayfield has had up to this point. Now, granted, I know it's only been 2.5 weeks, but the analytics and the statistics back up what we are seeing with our eyes, and that is that this kid just moves the offense. What should we expect this week out of Baker? Well, he has 637 yards passing in the 2 games that he started. He has, in the most recent game, this is against the Ravens, and they're pretty stout defense, especially against the pass. He still threw for 342 yards and a touchdown. He added 23 yards rushing, which is always a nice benefit when we're talking about our quarterback position. Whenever you can get 2 or 3 or 5 points rushing, that's a nice little benefit to the point totals always. One last piece around the analytics with Baker Mayfield. PFF also ranked Baker the highest in adjusted accuracy rating during his first start, the highest rookie debut they have recorded for at least the last 5 years. He slightly beat out Carson Wentz, and after that, it was a pretty big drop-off. So he is, based on his debut, the best rookie they've seen, and based on what we've seen, he is one of the best rookies to come out of college football in quite some time. Now, you should expect some up and downs with a rookie quarterback, and I think most fans know that, but here in Cleveland, we've only ever experienced the downs with not even just rookies, any quarterbacks, really. I'm not going to go back and recite the list of 30 names, mostly because I try to forget that list like all of you. But this guy is different, and I think he is very much a quarterback that you can play from a fantasy perspective. But more than that, it's a reason to watch these games again. And we haven't had that, this decade. Switching gears a little bit to some of his options at the receiver position and the tight end position. We'll start with David Njoku at tight end. The Chargers are actually pretty good at defending this position. They are 8th in the league, meaning they do not give up many points to the tight end position. Since Baker has become the starter, Njoku is averaging about 12 points per game in PPR leagues. He has scored 0 touchdowns in those 2.5 games. So there's a potential that we might see what we call a positive touchdown regression, meaning he has a decent amount of targets, many receptions in that time, a decent amount of yards, relatively speaking, and no touchdowns yet. So there's always a chance that David Njoku could break out of that touchdown spell. But if you have another option that you like at the position this week, I would probably look there. You know, this is a defense that has been pretty good up through 5 weeks at defending this position specifically. With that said, they have not been good at defending on the outside. And so I would definitely start Jarvis Landry. I think Jarvis Landry probably has to be in your starting lineup regardless of who the Browns play, but especially high on him this week. The Chargers are 26th in the league versus the wide receiver position in fantasy football thus far. Again, it's only through 5 weeks, but their cornerbacks struggle to guard wide receivers. And that, I think, is certainly going to hold true on Sunday when we get Jarvis Landry up against that secondary. Jarvis has had 10 targets in both the games that Baker has started. I look for him to at least replicate that number of targets this week. And I think it's going to be a little more than that with the injury to Hollywood Higgins. So I definitely think Jarvis Landry needs to remain in your starting lineup this week. The rest of the options I'm not as high on. Antonio Callaway, he averages about 7 targets per game. I think you can probably start him if you're desperate for some help this week. I think without Higgins in the lineup, you might expect to see some more targets for Callaway. If he can get 10 to, maybe even 12 targets, I think he can be a very good player, but just the volume has not been there thus far. He has not been the most reliable option. I don't love Callaway in this game, but if you need someone, I think you could do worse. The last receiver, the last healthy receiver on the roster that warrants any type of discussion is the man we saw for the second half of that Baltimore game, and that's Derek Willis. He only had 5 targets, but keep in mind that's in about 1/2 of play. He will be playing in the slot, and Baker is throughout his whole career, college and what we've seen in the pros, he's very good at reading defenses based on this position, what this position does. He bases a lot of his reads off of that, and a lot of times the slot ends up to be one of the first or the second read in the Todd Haley offense. Antonio Brown played a lot of slot for Pittsburgh for this very reason. It's an offense designed to get this position open. You can do a lot with the two-way goes, and this is a position that if you have a decent player in a Todd Haley offense, you can do a lot. And so for those reasons, if you have an open roster spot, it might be worth adding Derek Willis just to see if what we saw in the Baltimore game, the second half and overtime, if he's able to replicate anything close to that. What I mean by that is if he gets 7 to 8 targets this week, if he's able to have a catch and run like he had against Baltimore. This is a position in a Todd Haley offense that can do a lot of damage. And he's going to be playing it for at least the next couple weeks while Higgins gets better. And Higgins didn't exactly do a whole heck of a lot in this offense either. I know he caught a touchdown, the only one against Baltimore, but there's a chance that Derek Willis might surprise some people. So if you have an open roster spot, you might consider adding him. We will conclude our deep dive here into the Browns offense by looking in the backfield next. And, there are three players. These three players haven't changed since the start of the season. Carlos Hyde is still going to be the starter, regardless of, I think, this year what Nick Chubb does, for better or worse. I think Carlos Hyde is going to be your starter. And I think he is someone you can start this week. He has had 16 carries in every single game thus far. At least 16 carries in every single game thus far. He might be somewhat touchdown dependent this week because the Chargers have only allowed 117 yards rushing over their last two games combined. So this is a defense that has had some success in stopping the running game. And so he's going to be a bit of a risky play here, but the running back position is very difficult to find anybody that you can start with any sort of confidence. And you can have confidence that Carlos Hyde is going to get volume this week. What he does with that remains to be seen, but he's certainly someone that I would have in my starting lineup if I had him on my fantasy squad. Duke Johnson, he actually led all running backs last week against the Ravens with 41 snaps. And he only had 5 carries in those 41 snaps, but he did turn those into 35 yards rushing against a pretty good Ravens defense. And the Chargers, they have had a difficult time thus far in stopping backs out of the backfield in the receiving game, which, as we all know, is Duke Johnson's forte. So I think he is someone that you can potentially start as maybe an RB2 if you're looking for some help this week. He's going to be dependent on what they do in the passing game for the most part, but he'll be on the field. He'll get some targets, and I think if you're in a PPR league, you can probably start Duke Johnson as well. I will not recommend starting Nick Chubb. He has 13 rushing attempts this entire season. Yes, he turned those 3 attempts against Oakland into 110 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. But until I see a game where Nick Chubb gets 10 rushing attempts at least and maybe a reception, he's only been targeted once the entire season in the passing game. He's not someone that you can start. If you have him on your team, you might not want to get rid of him just yet because the upside is certainly there. And that's hard to find at the running back position. But this is a guy that you cannot start unless something happens to Carlos Hyde. That's going to do it for the fantasy segment here in the I Still Believe in Cleveland podcast. We'll be back next week to talk more about some of the Browns' offensive options. Thanks so much, everyone. Talk to you next week.
The Ohio State University alumni Eric Saunier joins me now to talk some Jabril Peppers and the Browns defense. So Eric, Jabril had a very good game against the Ravens. What were your thoughts on his play and the key to utilizing his talents moving forward?
Jabril Peppers finished last week's game with 4 tackles and 2 passes defended. He also had a 12-yard punt return against the Ravens, which is huge for him. He's been a lot more active than I've seen in a while. I guess the fans mocking and heckling him at the CVS really did the trick. Going forward, I like to see Jabril continue to have opportunities within the box near the line of scrimmage. Facing shorter routes, I have confidence he can dislodge passes in the 10 to 15-yard area similarly to what he did last week. I also wouldn't mind seeing him coming through on blitzes in the A and B gaps, as he is a very physical player who can disrupt the passing and timing of Phillip Rivers.
So what's the latest on injuries in the secondary? And do you think the Browns will have enough depth to combat the Chargers' passing attack?
The Cleveland Browns held their own last week with E.J. Gaines and T.J. Carey on the outside. However, they will face another strong challenge this week with Phillip Rivers, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams. Two sneaky plays to watch out for are longtime veteran Antonio Gates and Austin Eckler. Eckler, who's been flying well under the radar, had one catch for 44 yards and a touchdown last week. Meanwhile, the Browns seem to apparently struggle against tight ends. Despite the fact that Antonio Gates is well past his prime, he can still make plays against this defense. I have confidence that the guys on the outside will again lock down receivers, but I'm worried a bit in nickel and dime packages where guys closer to the hash marks will be making plays against this defense.
We previously compared cornerback Denzel Ward to the top defenders in his draft class, but he's creating a ton of turnovers. What do you think the ceiling is for his accolades in the league?
Well, you'd have to look no further than Denzel Ward's former teammate at the Ohio State University, Marshawn Lattimore, who was a Rookie of the Year last season with the Saints at the same position of cornerback. I would say right now Denzel Ward is a front runner, as no one else is standing out in his rookie class on the defensive side of the ball. However, a lot of things can change over the next 11 weeks or so.
Christian Kirksey was back last week. He, Joe Schober, Jamie Collins anchored the team in tackles. Do you think these three are the real strength to the Browns' defense?
Looking at the stats, the three leading tacklers combined for a total of 33 stops were the linebackers, so one can look at it as the strength of the defense. Personally, I would call them the calming presence of this unit. The linebackers might not be making the big strip sack the way Myles Garrett would, or game-sealing interception the way Denzel Ward would. However, as long as they aren't giving up the biggest plays and are doing their jobs and making consistent stops within this defense, that's really all you can ask from the linebacking corps nowadays in the NFL.
Okay, so what defense will we see this Sunday? The one who faced the Ravens or the one who gave up 45 to the Raiders?
I believe we're going to see a defense that's somewhere in between what we saw last week and the week prior. The team feeds off this home energy and crowd, which should help with the defense. However, they're playing a better offense, I feel, than the Baltimore Ravens did. So that way I expect a few more points. Another thing to keep an eye on is Melvin Gordon, a tremendous running back who is great at both the receiving and running the football. The key for the defense will be limiting Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, as well as not allowing a huge play here and there, as Phillip Rivers is known to do. The Browns can do that, as well as putting pressure on Phillip Rivers to force several turnovers the way they have in other contests. I really like the Browns' chances. As many say, a West Coast team flying east to play 1 o'clock Eastern Time could be difficult for the Chargers, and I like our chances if a couple breaks can go our way.
Thanks again to Eric and Drew for the knowledge. Check out my Twitter account @Spony. That's SPONY. And you'll see a pinned tweet with how to subscribe to the podcast in Eric and Drew's Twitter accounts. We'd love to hear your positive reviews on iTunes or the Apple Podcasts app to help us grow. If you've got something constructive or even negative, just DM me on Twitter @Spony. Thanks to the Cleveland Browns and San Diego Chargers YouTube channels for interview audio. Lots of great stuff provided there, so check them out and subscribe. Also, the Cleveland Browns and San Diego Chargers radio networks. The I Still Believe in Cleveland podcast is released every Wednesday night, wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.